Imagine you are in a council of a highly esteemed university, whose founders included the founding fathers and some of the most important men in the history of the nation. The council has decided, universally, to recontextualize that history in a fashion that would, allegedly, be more palatable to modern sensibilities. How far would you go in achieving this recontextualization of historical events? For Washington and Lee University, this meant removing the headstone of one of the most famous horses of the American Civil War and replacing it in order to scrub any mention of Lee or the UDC's efforts to have him buried there. On July 14th of 2023, Washington and Lee University removed the headstone of Traveler, Robert E. Lee's favorite riding horse, and replaced it with a new headstone that deliberately left out any mention of the UDC or the horse's famous owner. This act was followed by further scrubbings of any mention of Traveler or Lee at the campus that bears his last name in honor of his work. These actions, however, did not go unnoticed. After word had gone around about what was taking place, the University Board of Trustees had been overwhelmed by a significant email campaign complaining about the actions taken by the university and its staff. The odd act of condemning a horse, of trying to rewrite the existence of a beast of burden, appears absurd on the face of it. This is because the act is absurd. There is no logical or rational reason for having to do any of this. None of the placards were damaged, nor was the headstone in any poor condition. However, we do not live in rational times, where common sense is common among those who make these decisions. We live in absurd times, ruled by leaders who have no rationality whatsoever. Rather, we are ruled by ideologues, men and women who care more about their progressive agendas more than they do about logic or reasoning. Men and women who hold no scruples when it comes to doing profane acts if it means furthering their progressive agenda. The explanation for why these things were attacked, for why they would condemn a horse, is because they condemn the men who rode upon that steed. They despise Robert E. Lee, a sentiment they make known full and well for all to see. These people view Lee as an absolute evil, the ultimate sign of everything they despise, because they champion all the things Lee would have rightfully condemned. Robert E. Lee was a man well known for his many virtues. His stoicism and calm during war is well attested to. His martial discipline, having never received a single demerit during his whole time at West Point, is well known. What is often less well known was his passion for education and propensity to support and lead educational institutions during his lifetime. Prior to the American Civil War, he was the superintendent of West Point for some years before going out west with a field commission. However, his most well-known tenure as an educational leader came just months after the American Civil War, when a struggling campus, Washington College in Lexington, Virginia, came to him and personally asked he lead the struggling educational institution. Prior to this, Washington College was struggling financially after the war had devastated the Shenandoah Valley, including the town of Lexington. In fact, the college had spent its last $40 on a horse and a nice suit specifically to ask Lee to help their struggling campus. Lee agreed and moved to Lexington, Virginia to personally organize the college and fix its dire financial situation. Over the course of his 4-year tenure as president of Washington College, the institution went from near total bankruptcy to having a solid $250,000 financial base, while the campus expanded rapidly. It was during Lee's years at the campus that a new commencement chapel would be built on the campus, a building that would later be called Lee Chapel. He would also put into place a code of conduct for all attendees of Washington College, which placed honor and discipline as core components of life on campus. When Lee died on October 12, 1870, the campus had become a major education center, on par in many regards to its next-door neighbor, VMI. It would be in the very chapel that Lee had built, where his office was set up in the basement, that Robert E. Lee would be laid to rest in a crypt, now home to his wife, several of his children, and several grandchildren. Washington College would later be renamed Washington and Lee University, in honor of Lee's hard work and dedication in his waning years, which saved the campus from insolvency. Without Lee, Washington College would likely have never survived in the post-war years. Yet, it exists today specifically because of Lee's actions as its president. This only compounds the irony of the current actions taken by the university. They attack the very man who saved the institution they now preside over simply due to that man not living up to their expectations. And yet, none of the people who made these decisions, who think themselves better than Lee, can even hold a candle up to the greatness of Robert E. Lee. Oh, how the meekly living pass judgment over the glorified dead. This leads us back to the beginning. Why, then, do they attack Traveler? Well, it all comes down to how deeply tied Traveler is to his master, Robert E. Lee. When we think of Lee, we think of Lee the general. Seldom often do we think of Lee the man. Lee had a soft spot for Traveler, which was developed soon after Lee had acquired Traveler in February 1862. During the war, Lee had a number of riding horses he would use from time to time. However, Traveler, in particular, stood out to him. Lee, who was not young in his years, came to admire the gray stallion for his ease of riding, his good temper, and relaxed composure during battle. When Lee wrote to his wife's cousin about painting Traveler, Lee said, "If I was an artist like you, I would draw a true picture of Traveler, representing his fine proportions, muscular figure, deep chest, short back, strong haunches, flat legs, small head, broad forehead, delicate ears, quick eye, small feet, and black mane and tail. Such a picture would inspire a poet, whose genius could then depict his worth and describe his endurance of toil, hunger, thirst, heat, and cold, and the dangers of suffering through which he has passed. He could dilate upon the sagacity and affection, and his invariable response to every wish of his writer. He might even imagine his thoughts through the long night marches and days of the battle through which he has passed. But I am no artist, Marquis, and can therefore only say he is a Confederate Gray." Through the flowery language and attention to detail, we can get a glimpse of how Lee viewed Traveler. To Lee, Traveler was no horse. He was as much a companion and friend as any of his staff officers might be. To Lee, Traveler was one thing he could rely upon, a trusted friend that would follow him where he'd go. And, in a sense, Traveler did follow Lee, to the great beyond. Less than a year after his master's death, Traveler stepped on a nail, which penetrated his hoof. Tetanus soon set in, a disease that was incurable during the time, and, to prevent him from suffering, he was put down. He was initially buried on the campus grounds, but, unlike his master, his remains would end up being exhibited in New York and later at Washington and Lee University in 1907. Finally, in 1971, almost 100 years after he had passed away, his remains were finally interred next to Lee Chapel, mere feet away from where his master lay in repose. It comes as no surprise, then, why so many have taken offense to what the university has done. Their disdain for Lee has morphed into a disdain for everything associated with Lee. This, by extension, means that Traveler is guilty of some metaphysical evil that the poor creature could never comprehend. The demonization of Lee has morphed into a demonization of all things, whether innocent or guilty. Yet, this prompts a final, disturbing question for you, the audience, to contemplate. If these people hold enough disdain that they would willingly desecrate the legacy of a horse, how much do these people despise you? What sort of evil do these people wish to enact against you, who speak out against these things and call their deeds the evil deeds they are? The people who wish these things are not our friends, but I still pray for them all the same, in the hope, whether it be a vain act or not, that they may see the error of their ways and turn away from them. This, I believe, is fitting and proper to do. May God bless Robert E. Lee. May God bless Traveler. And may God bless all of you.